Okay, as we begin our lesson this morning, I'm going to enlist the help of my first and second grade class that Susan and I teach. So if you guys will come on up here, first and second graders, they're going to help me out with a song that we've learned in class. Come on, there's 15 of you. I only see 3. Come on. Oh, here they come. All right, very good. Okay, so one of the lessons that we did is, there we go, energy. Good job, guys. One of the lessons we've done is on Moses crossed the Red Sea, and that is our lesson for today. So I have these little cards that they sing off of, and it says, like, did Moses jump across the Red Sea? No. Did he run across on top of the water? No. Did he fly in an airplane? No. So that's the way that the song goes, okay? So I'm going to show them these cue cards. You guys sing out. I'm going to turn off the microphone, okay? So here we go. Could you hear? You hear? Okay. Okay, good. So now you know how I got across. I'll offer the invitation song, and we'll be done. I'm just. What are your bad habits? Oh, come on. Everybody in here's got some bad habits. And probably your friends or your spouse knows your bad habits more than you know your own bad habits. There's a lady who has put forth her list of the 13 bad habits you need to quit right away. And here they are. Stress eating, nail biting, hanging out with naysayers, being with people who don't appreciate you, smoking, excessive drinking, eating junk food, yes, including diet soda, eating too much red meat, watching too much TV, being late, being in bad relationships, leaving things to the last minute, and focusing on the negatives. Now, if you didn't make these 13, I know you've got one. We all have one somewhere. Bad habits. This morning, as we look at Moses crossing the Red Sea and the events surrounding it, I want us to find in the lesson 4 bad habits that will affect your faith. And as we study from Hebrews chapter 11 and we look at these men and women of faith, we've come to Moses, the man of God, Moses, the giver of the law. And as we look at it this morning, I want us to consider some habits, bad habits, that can negatively affect our faith. In Hebrews 11, verse 29, the Bible simply says this about Moses crossing the Red Sea. By faith, they crossed the Red Sea as though they were on dry land. And when the Egyptians attempted to do this, they were drowned. One of my mom's favorite movies was Charlton Heston's The 10 Commandments. And I can remember as a child sitting around, of course, during those days, I don't remember if we had a VHS tape of it yet or not, but back in those days, we had to just watch it when it happened to come on television. And we would make a big deal about making sure we were tuned in when Moses was going to part the Red Sea. That was just the most amazing part of the movie. And my mom, in her wisdom, she would have a Bible open, and we would follow along with the Bible. And it was a way for me to be aware that the things in the Bible the Bible needs to be used to confirm the accuracy and the truth of the things we're hearing. And so she'd read along maybe a certain section and we'd be watching it. Or if something wasn't quite in the Bible, it was just, some kind of extrapolation or some way of forcing the story a little bit. She'd say, no, that's not really what the Bible says on that. But this was an amazing scene and very impressionable upon me as a youngster. I thought it might be interesting for you who enjoy this kind of thing to talk about some of the maps. When Moses crossed the Red Sea with the children of Israel after the 10 plagues on their great exodus, if you will, the traditional route that is given is this one that shows very near the modern-day Egypt, their crossing of the Red Sea, and then going down to Mount Sinai down at the southern end of the Sinai Peninsula, and then going on up into Canaan from there. It has some problems. It's too near to Pharaoh's power center. It doesn't provide the idea, which if you've read the text, that Pharaoh says they've made a tactical error. They have forced themselves into this place they can't escape. There's mountains on one side, there's the sea on the other side. And so this kind of doesn't have that aspect to it. There's no place on the western side where many people could have congregated. And I think one of the most compelling pieces of evidence to me is that in these times, the Sinai Peninsula was Egypt, and it was under control of Egypt. So they wouldn't have gone far enough to get away from Pharaoh by the time that they got there. But this could be right. I'm just giving you both sides. One of the routes that is suggested is this one. The green route that you see is one of the ancient roads or the ancient paths that goes through the mountains there. And so there is a section where God tells Moses, turn now to the south. And so we see that turn here, going across the main traveling road there and then turning south. And down here seems to be a pretty likely location. Here's a blow-up of it from Google Maps, and you can see that it actually has a little beach there where all the people could have congregated. It would have been a place that would have taken into consideration the mountains on one side, the sea on the other side, and no escape route except for the crossing of the Red Sea. So here are all those put together. You can see them leaving from Goshen, going across. The yellow route actually would be the quickest way. The blue route was another highway, but it would have been twice as long as the closest way. And then the one in orange, which is suggested as the way that they may have crossed. If we use this site, this place, this crossing site, it is 1/4 to 1/2 mile wide, and it's 6 miles from west to east across through the water. Now, if we think about this, imagine in 6 miles you would lose sight of what was behind you. Think about the faith that would have been involved in going across and seeing the land behind you kind of disappear in the distance. And you might could see 6 miles on a good day, but it's a long ways away by the time you get into the middle of the sea and you've traveled 3 miles in. The faith that would have been involved in such a trip across the dry ground there in the Red Sea. Let's turn to Exodus chapter 14. We'll spend our lesson time here. Exodus 14. Let's read verses 5 through 14. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, Pharaoh and his officials changed their minds about the people and said, "What have we done? We have released Israel from serving us." So he got his chariot ready and took his troops with him. He took 600 of his best chariots and all the rest of the chariots of Egypt with officers in each one. The Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he pursued the Israelites who were going out defiantly. The Egyptians, all Pharaoh's horses and chariots, his horsemen and his army, chased after them and caught them as they camped beside Pi-Hahiroth and Baal-zephon. And as Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up, and there were the Egyptians coming after them. The Israelites were terrified and cried out to the Lord for help. They said to Moses, Is it because there are no graves in Egypt that you've taken us out here to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us, bringing us out of Egypt? Isn't this what we told you in Egypt? Leave us alone so that we may serve the Egyptians. It would have been better to serve the Egyptians than die in the wilderness. But Moses said to the people, don't be afraid. Stand firm and see the Lord's salvation that He will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you, and you must be quiet. So what are the 4 bad habits? The first one is grumbling. Grumbling. We told you to leave us alone. You've brought us out here into the wilderness. Now think about these people. They have just witnessed the 10 plagues against the mighty empire of Egypt, world power, world domination. And God has brought them down, and they've been released, these slaves. We told you to leave us alone. Grumbling is a bad habit. Notice verse 12. Isn't this what we told you in Egypt? Leave us alone so we may serve the Egyptians. It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. So I have 2 cartoons for you to lighten the mood here a little bit. Stop complaining. What do you mean stop complaining? Would you actually deny me one of my remaining pleasures? Or this one. Quit complaining. My kid just dropped out of med school and is opening a tanning and nail salon. I got to tell you, I was looking for a good cartoon, and I found myself getting frustrated because I couldn't find a good one. And I thought, here I am complaining about finding one about complaining. That's a better illustration than the cartoon, isn't it? I was getting upset and mad because I couldn't find a good cartoon. Oh, me. Jude 1:16 says, these people are disgruntled grumblers. The ESV says, these are grumblers and malcontents. The Phillips says, these are men who complain and curse their fate. The King James Version says, these are murmurers and complainers. Don't you like that word, murmurers? The Living Bible says, these men are constant gripers and never satisfied. And the Message makes up a word. These are the grumpers and the bellyachers. Time and time again, we find the Israelites grumbling, griping, and complaining. It's a bad habit. And if we are going to be people of faith, we're going to have to find a way to stop complaining so much. Grumbling can take over our hearts. It can become what we're the best at. It frustrates me sometimes. This is a personal thing in politics. It's easy to be the one who just complains all the time. It doesn't require any work. You just sit around and just be mad all the time. That's easy. Just grumble what everybody else does. I didn't like that. I don't agree with that. Or other things about our comfort. It's too hot in here. It's too cold in here. I can't hear in here. It's too loud in here. The lesson was too long. It was too short. I didn't like that song. It's not my favorite song. On and on and on we can go. And we can become professional grumblers, and it will influence and affect negatively our faith. And grumbling does the devil's work for him. After all, if we can just complain and criticize, then Satan's accomplished very good things among his own people. And so we have the people of God, the children of Israel, who complain against Moses, poor Moses, a humble man, leading because God called him to lead, but yet time and time again, the people are always saying, we want a different leader. You're not doing things right. You've brought us out here to die. We're thirsty. We're hungry. We don't like that kind of food. And we can't take over the land of Canaan. And over again, there's grumbling and grumbling and grumbling. It sounds an awful lot like us. And refusing to grumble is a rare and powerful force in the world. Do not underestimate how powerful it is to resist the urge to complain. And people who will live their lives complaining less will have a powerful influence in the world for good. Imagine if one of the qualities of God's people was that we don't complain. Can you imagine what kind of an impact that would have, even in its just that one thing in the world, when everyone else complains about everything else going on that I don't? In Philippians chapter 2, Paul writes, do everything without grumbling and arguing. Now notice this impact in the world, so that you may be blameless and pure, children of God who are faultless in a crooked and perverted generation, among whom you shine like stars in the world. Christians are to be different. And if we don't complain, that shines in the world as something that's different. Because the tendency is for us to complain. It just is. It's my tendency too, even though I'm a fairly positive person. Even I fairly easily am drawn into it. And so when Paul wrote to the Corinthians, he used these children of Israel as examples. And one of the things he points out about them is he says these things were written as examples for us. And in 1 Corinthians 10:10, he talks about their complaining as one of the aspects that God was displeased about. And don't complain as some of them did and were killed by the destroyer. They were complainers. May it not be said of us. It's a bad habit that destroys faith. So the faith question for this lesson then, will I be content or will I grumble? Imagine if we asked this question about those things in our lives. Just say, am I going to be content or am I going to complain? Number 2, avoiding silence. Now, I had first, this morphed a little bit. I had different words here. The first one I had was talk too much. And that might fit, but it's not the right shade of meaning that I was looking for. I think the Bible presents here. I think this one's better, although it's not perfect. It's avoiding silence. So notice what it says in verses 13 and 14. Moses said to the people, don't be afraid. Stand firm and see the Lord's salvation that he will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you, and you must be quiet. Now, I picked this one probably because it's a habit that I don't master very well. Silence. Notice these version comparisons which give a nice flavor to this verse. The Lord shall fight for you, ye shall hold your peace. The Lord will fight for you, and you must be quiet. The Lord will fight for you. You have only to be silent. The Lord will fight for you, and all you have to do is keep still. God will fight the battle for you, and you keep your mouths shut. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Psalm 46 and verse 10 says, be still and know that I am God. Moses commanded the people to purge their fear and replace it with silence. Because in silence they would find God and they would find courage. I'm not silent enough. Are you? You think about the world we live in, we fill every moment with some kind of sound. Every moment. Even if we're driving, the radio has to be going. We fill every moment of our lives with some kind of noise. And I would like to suggest to you that silence is rarely silent. Because it is in silence that we have time to think about the things that are in our minds. Maybe that's why we surround ourselves with noise. Because we come face to face with things about ourselves that maybe we don't want to think about. So we can escape through noise. So I think it's great that Moses tells the people, or that God tells Moses, I will fight for you. All you have to do is just be quiet or be still. So the faith question is, will I trust or will I fear? Because it is in the lack of silence that fear shows its face. Are you silent enough? Number 3, 4 bad habits that hinder faith, living far from God. Now I'm going to pull this from this section in Exodus 14, verses 19 and 20, because I think it's a powerful reminder for the children of Israel that God is near them, that they live in God's presence. Then the angel of God, who was going in front of the Israelite forces, moved and went behind them. The pillar of cloud moved from in front of them and stood behind them. It came between the Egyptian and Israelite forces. There was cloud and darkness. It lit up the night, and neither group came near to the other all night long. Here are a couple of pictures. Can you imagine seeing something so brilliant and amazing? A reminder visually of the presence of God. The Bible tells us that the pillar of fire at night was bright enough that the people could travel at night. It provided light for them. A vivid reminder that God is near us. God is leading us. God is in control. God is here with us. Constant reminders of the presence of God. As the Bible tells us, it rested there above the Ark of the Covenant, showing again that this was a holy place, that they were holy people, God's people. In Exodus 13, the preceding chapter, the one we're studying, after they left Egypt, the Bible describes that the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to lead them on their way during the day, and in a pillar of fire to give them light at night so they could travel day or night. The pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night never left its place in front of the people. I love that section because it describes the kind of lives that faithful people are to live, and that is to always be in God's presence. If the only time we enter into God's presence is here, then we have missed out on God's leadership and presence Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. The pillar of fire then provided light for the whole camp. Now let's do a little self-evaluation. Am I living near to Jesus or far from Him? It's easy for distance to creep into our faith walk. It's easy for us who once felt close to God to feel far away. It's easy for us who live in God's presence to look up and say, what happened to me? And why am I far away now? I didn't want to be. I often think of this drifting. It's something I learned in childhood, and it occurs in the ocean when you're swimming in the ocean. And I can remember my mother being on her towel. She didn't get in the ocean, She just put her toes in. But she'd be with all of our stuff, protecting all of our stuff on the beach. And we'd be jumping up in the waves, and be maybe waist deep or maybe chest deep and just kind of bouncing along. And I would look up and I would look for my mother. And I'd look for her out on the beach. I'd look. I couldn't find her. It's like, where did she go? I was constantly looking. And she was way down there. And my first instinct was, well, she got up and she moved all of our stuff down there, but that wasn't the truth. You see, each time I jumped up when a wave came, I moved 1 foot to the right in the current. And I did that over and over and over again, and suddenly I was way down, and I didn't even know I had even moved. And I think if we aren't careful, that happens in our relationship with God. Is we've moved slowly and slowly out of God's presence and away from Him. So where did you rate yourself? Far or near? God told Moses, my presence will go with you, and I will give you rest. So the faith question is, will I live in God's presence or will I be distant from Him? The good news is you can change that. Number 4, and we will look at this in more detail in coming lessons, putting limits on God. I did have this as the title there, so I moved it to another slide. Failing to believe that God can do anything. See, we greatly limit what God can do because we place limits on what He can do. I like what was read in our Bible reading today. The Israelites had walked through the sea on dry ground with the waters like a wall to them on their right and their left. That day the Lord saved Israel from the power of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. And when Israel saw the great power the Lord used against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord and believed in Him and in His servant Moses. The reason I chose this is because I want you to see that God's miracle, His power was great. It wasn't just a little bit. They didn't walk through on almost dry ground. They weren't almost rescued. They weren't almost delivered. They were delivered because God's power is great. And if we will cast aside doubts and fears, we can unleash and unchain what God can do in our lives. God's deliverance is complete. It is 100%. God can do anything. Even make a wall of water stand up for 6 miles on one side and another and let multiple thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people, and their animals and carts and possessions, tents, everything, all pass over on dry ground to the other side and then collapse on the pursuing Egyptian army. So how much more faith would I have if I lived by the power of what God can do? Will I believe that God can do anything, or will I doubt? It makes a difference in how we proceed even with church matters. Sometimes we spend too much time figuring out what we are able to accomplish. And in doing so, limit what God can do because He can do more. Now, we've looked at 4 bad habits, and we could have found more. The good news is that bad habits can be changed. Bad habits can be replaced with good ones. So let's just take the same 4 bad habits and let's make them into good habits. After all, brushing your teeth is a good habit. So habits can be good. Avoid grumbling. That's a good habit. Cling to silence more. A good habit. Find God there. Maybe even find yourself. Live near to God. Beware drifting away from Him over time, but be near to Him, be close to Him. You remember those days when you were. You know what it seems like, what it feels like, what it should be like. Reclaim that with good habits of being near to Him. And fourthly, don't limit God. Let's bow for a prayer. Father, in our lives, we find ourselves sometimes in bad habits, but you are great. You can do anything. And we ask you to deliver us from our bad habits. I pray, Lord, that we will trust more and complain less and be silent and in your presence more often. In Jesus' holy name we pray, amen. If you'd like to respond this morning, come as we stand and sing.